my boss, Kelly Close, said, you should really think about, compiling it into one guide and writing a book. And I said, I definitely don't want to do that. It sounds like way too much work. My job is already stressful. And then I talked to some authors who've written other books in diabetes, and my conclusion from that was kind of like, you probably shouldn't write a book. It sounds like a lot of work, and will anyone read it? And then here we are with the book. So it's been a really challenging project, I think, for me. My goal was to write something that anyone with diabetes, whether they have just diagnosed or 50 years of diabetes, can pick up and improve something immediately. So if you get nothing out of this lecture, at least thumb through the book, because I promise you will get one useful thing from it, because there's hundreds of tips and tricks and tactics in there. And the book focuses on food, mindset, exercise, and sleep. So it's only 4 chapters, and each chapter focuses on what I call, that's not really the slide that I was thinking it would be. Each chapter focuses on bright spots and landmines, but I've spoiled one of the best slides in the presentation. So I'll get into what those are. So I was diagnosed at age 12 and had the very typical diagnosis, parents really overwhelmed, I crying. But I am also the oldest of 6 kids, so as we were saying, responsibility is kind of my thing. As the oldest of a big family, you just are responsible. So I was taking on my diabetes from a very young age, and doing all the things that our doctor told us to do, and our outcomes were really terrible. And I was baffled for many years and felt like a failure at every doctor's appointment, and I think my mom felt like a failure, but she also, because I was so responsible, she trusted me with a lot of, the diabetes care. And I think there were 2 really big problems when I look back on that time. The first was, when you're diagnosed with diabetes, you're told, you got to take care of this thing because you need to avoid long-term complications, right? That's what we all hear when we're diagnosed. How many were told that? Yeah, so that's the common messaging. And I think there's 2 challenges for that, especially when you're diagnosed young. The first is that it's a very long time horizon. So for me as a teenager, how do my actions today impact that very long time horizon, having complications in many years? And so it's easy to justify not making good decisions on today because the consequences are so far away. And the other is that it's so negative. Do all this work so that you avoid this negative long-term outcome. It's not a very uplifting message. So I think that was one big problem. And the other was we were told you can eat anything with diabetes as long as you take insulin for it. Was anyone told this when they were diagnosed? Yeah. So I think that advice did not work for us. It may work for other people, but it most certainly did not work for me and my family, because to eat anything you want with diabetes, you have to pay a lot of attention to insulin dosing, and your blood sugars are gonna be all over the place, just because that's what crazy food that normal people without diabetes eat. That's what it does to your blood sugar. So I ran an A1C in the 8 and the 9% range for many years, and it was between 40 and 400, and kind of felt like a failure at all my doctor's appointments. So how do we go from there to a book? I think there were 3 really pivotal turning points, and I talk about these in the introduction. One is that I started taking nutrition classes in college. So that got me thinking about what I was eating. I started trying different foods and diets and seeing what impact it had on how I felt and what my blood sugars were. The second was this was my college roommate. So that will sort of change how you think about your health when you have a bodybuilder as a college roommate, lifting weights and eating, whey protein at all times of day. And I think the last was in 2010, I started working at Diatribe. So my job every day, as a summer intern actually, so my job every day was to write about diabetes and learn about it and share what's happening in the field. And at the same time, I remember sitting in a conference. I was a summer intern at Diatribe, and it was in Colorado, and there was a panel of patients who had just gotten on CGM. So CGM in 2010 it had been out for a couple years, but it was still the Dexcom 7 Plus era, so it was still kind of early. CGM wasn't ready for prime time. And all these patients were talking about what a game changer it was for managing their diabetes. And so I remember going to the lobby of the conference center and calling up Dexcom and ordering a Dexcom right from the lobby, because I was so convinced that it was going to be a game changer. So I think that wearing CGM really accelerates your learning curve with diabetes because you can see in real time the impact of your decisions. I see how many people are on CGM. Okay, maybe I should have asked how many people are not on CGM. Okay, well, obviously.
Well, my son.
Your son is not. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So, diabetes bright spots. What is that? That's the title. That's the focus of the book. And I think if you take only this away, it's been a useful presentation, I think, because this is not an intuitive way of thinking. None of us intuitively thinks this way. The idea is, what are the things that I'm doing well that I should be doing more often? Or what actually works? So when my blood sugar is in range, like, what happened there? Like, what did I eat? What did I do on that day? What was my schedule like? What was the particular meal I ate, and why did that happen? And then the key with bright spots, what puts me in a positive frame of mind, the key is, how can I have those things happen more often? So it's different from saying what's going wrong and how do I do less of it. It's what's going right and how do I do more of it. And I think this is way more useful, and it's also the thing that most of us don't do that often. So the book has 43 of these, and I'll get into some of them in specifics, but it's all about identifying those specific behaviors or routines or strategies or foods or whatever that result in positive outcomes, and then figuring out ways to clone them so they happen more often. That makes sense to everyone? Okay, and then landmines are the opposite. These are the things that we can all pinpoint, right? When things go crazy, when the blood sugar's way out of range, what goes wrong? When I feel really crappy and stressed, what caused that? And the key, what choices do I always regret? Like when the tortilla chips are in a see-through bag on the counter and I just eat 60 tortilla chips, but I ate them one at a time, but then my blood sugar is, 300, right? What makes me feel really crappy about myself or my diabetes or drives burnout? And then the key with diabetes landmines is, how can I have fewer of them happen? And so it's all about setting up a plan of attack. So I know what my landmines are. Like if it's the tortilla chips, like I know that when they're on the counter, I'm gonna eat all of them. So I need to have them somewhere else or have them not in the house. So the key with diabetes landmines is identifying them and then having a plan of attack so that they don't happen as often. And I'll get into specifics because I know this still might be a little bit hazy. So a big thesis of the book, in case this slide doesn't tell you, is that bright spots are way more important than landmines. So if you only have to focus one, I say focus on your bright spots. That's why it's the first thing in the title. That's why there's a light bulb on the cover. That's why there's 43 of these in the book and only 16 of those. And I talk about some research in the introduction by this positive psychology professor named Barbara Fredrickson. And she talks about how you need a ratio of 3 positive to 1 negative to really flourish. That's what her research suggests. So a 3-to-1 ratio of positive to negative. And I think most of us are maybe 3 negative to 1 positive, or maybe 1-to-1 if we're doing well. So this is not an intuitive way of thinking, and that's why I think it's so powerful. There are a few things that have to apply for something to be a bright spot. So one, it needs to be specific. So eat healthy is not a bright spot. It's completely vague. There's nothing actionable about eat healthy. I don't know what that means, and that could mean different things. So it needs to be specific. So eat less than 30 grams of carbs at one time. That is a bright spot because it's specific, and I've identified that that's something that benefits my diabetes. It's also got to be sustainable. So not eating is also not a bright spot because that is not a sustainable strategy. So, maybe eating an early dinner and not snacking afterwards, that is at least something that's sustainable, and that's a bright spot, but not eating doesn't work. The last is it has to be changeable. So bad weather, which is not really something we have in the Bay Area, but if you lived in Minnesota, bad weather is not a diabetes landmine because it's not in my control. So it's got to be something that I can change. So I talk about this all or nothing mentality. Like, hey Jen, if I don't have an hour, so I can't exercise, and I'll talk about my solution to that. But that is something that is changeable because I can change the way that I think about how I frame exercise, and I'll get into that in a bit. So that's the framework of the book. Bright spots and landmines. That's what they are. That's the kind of proving ground for what they need to be, and. The book has 4 chapters, and each chapter shares my personal bright spots and landmines. And I worked really hard to make sure that even if you only read the 43 bright spots and 16 landmines, you should get something out of the book. So they're that specific. So I'll just give a few examples from each chapter, and then we can open it up for questions. And you can also interrupt me at any time, especially if something that you brought up is relevant to what I'm talking about. Sound good? Cool. Okay, so food. We kind of went through this before, but like I said, the diet that I was given at diagnosis was eat whatever you want as long as you take insulin for it. And so I've done, over time I discovered that cutting the carbs out really helped with the blood sugars, keep them in range, but shockingly it also reduced my diabetes hassle. So it was less work to manage diabetes because I had less counting, less lows and highs, less burden, less stress, less predicting, less math. So it was like this double home run of better blood sugars and less work, which is pretty cool. But a lot of people are still advised to eat a high whole grain diet. And so I've put some of this to the test in my column and diatribe, where I test different diets, track everything, and see what the impact is. And so this is just a head-to-head example of kind of the typical, I call it low-fat, normal carb. By normal carb, I mean 40% carb, which for me would be, let's see, if you're eating like 2,000 calories, that's like 200 carbs a day, 250 carbs a day is kind of normal-ish carb. And low carb, which for me is generally under 100, so that's less than 30 per meal is what I shoot for. And there's a pretty big difference, and also this is more work. Like this is just flat out more work to count and dose insulin and react to the lows, and then have a high, dose insulin, react to the lows. So this to me was very surprising, because you wouldn't think that the complete opposite food advice that I got at diagnosis was actually what works the best. And also I was put on a statin in college at 22 because my LDL was really high, and what it was this diet driving my LDL up. And since I switched to eating, I eat about 60 to 70% fat and then the rest carb and protein, all my triglyceride numbers, LDL, all that's improved. So that is, everyone is different, so some people don't respond as well to this as I have, but for me, this is the first bright spot in the book for a reason. And this is my, this is my own 90-day data, and I put this in the book to show that this works. That's the only reason it's in the book, is to show that this works and this is less work. So that to me is like the crazy trifecta of that. So that's why it's in the book. So eat less than 30 grams of carbs at one time, and obviously it's not a hard line, so 31 versus 29 is irrelevant, but the idea is just reducing the number. And the book actually has a lot of pictures of stuff that I do eat, and I think people tend to think of low carb as kind of a painful way to eat or crappy diet, but this is the kind of stuff I eat. So chia pudding we can talk about. I think it's pretty delicious. Eggs, but instead of potatoes, I'll have salad. That's almond flour pizza, so that doesn't have a very big impact. This is fajitas with these great low-carb tortillas that most grocery stores sell. Riced cauliflower is a really awesome thing to use instead of rice. You're a fan of riced cauliflower. These are almond flour waffles, so you just make them with almond flour and eggs and put them in a waffle. So, I think this is pretty appetizing food, and it has all of those other benefits that I just talked about. Yeah, and so to get to the point about can teenagers do this, I think it's a wonderful question. And would my teenage self have been able to do this? I do think I would have eaten waffles and pizza. I would have been game for that. It's not, maybe it's 85% as good as the normal full flour ones, but that's a pretty good trade-off, I think, and I would encourage people to try that. But the low-carb community online has come up with some very, very impressive stuff, and even 2 years ago, most of the stuff on this slide I hadn't even made before. So I'm always learning about new low-carb tricks and tips, and I'm not really a recipe person, but if you go hunting for low-carb recipes, you'll be shocked by what you find. It's pretty appetizing food. Okay, so let's say you're with someone who's just not going to happen. Just do it at breakfast. If you have to, just do it at one meal a day, do it at breakfast. So if you'll eat eggs, or do breakfast burritos with these low-carb tortillas, or do waffles, or do, I promise you I can make you a mean chia pudding if you want. We can talk about that. So just do it at breakfast. Breakfast is the hardest time of day, I think, because time is of the essence. Lack of sleep really drives insulin resistance, and I get that the worst in the morning. So when I don't have enough sleep and I have caffeine in the morning, it just all stacks, and it's easy to have really high blood sugar. So that's my biggest recommendation on that point, is if you can't do low carb, just do it at breakfast. I think it sets up the entire day for the rest of the day to go well. And it's funny, I know the chia pudding is kind of a weird thing, but I'll tell you the way that I make it and then the variations that I've had. Have people tried this, by the way, in the room? What do you think?
I like it.
Yeah.
And I think it's best if you mix the chia with, I mix it with milk.
Nice.
Evening before, then it's really easy to digest.
Yeah. So the idea is these chia seeds, these are like the chia pets, if you remember those. There are these little poppy seeds, and when you put them in water, they soak up the water and create this gel, which is 80% fiber. So chia seeds are basically fiber and omega-3s. So they
free food.
Yeah, they're totally a free food. I mean, it's very flat. So so I do 4. They have a ton of fiber, so they're super filling. So I do 4 tablespoons of chia and a half a cup of water, and then from there you can do what you want with it. So I do cinnamon and coconut oil and almonds and berries, but if you want to do whatever, you can. The nice thing about chia seeds is it's kind of a flavor canvas, so you can flavor it however you want. There are a ton of recipes actually for it on the internet, but most of them dump a lot of honey in there, which is counter to the whole point. But I encourage you to experiment with this. I eat it every single day for breakfast, and I bring it to conferences because then I don't have to have Starbucks muffins for breakfast.
So no cooking? You don't cook it?
You don't cook it, yeah. So sorry, I didn't explain how you actually make it. So you mix the water or milk or whatever liquid for about a minute, and then it soaks it up, and then you kind of let it sit for a minute or two. You can also make it, you can quadruple it and make it overnight and have it for 4 days instead of 1. So a lot of people do that too. Yeah, but it just soaks up the water, and then from there you're off and running.
But this is where they talk about if you plan, okay, if you don't plan, you can fast, and if you plan it, and to make something like that, it's available. So rather than going out, oh, you didn't have breakfast, then you go to the Jack in Box
Right.
for the whatever. And if you plan ahead of time, and blueberries are low carb, I've got a whole carb ratio, ounce per carb, set up, so I can just look at this thing and I say, okay, all right, I got 2 ounces of blueberry, that's going to be 6 carbs, and I got this and this.
Yeah. So the other thing is I just have them on auto shipment from Amazon, and it's nice because it's like every day this is what I have. I don't have to make a decision. It's just what I have.
It's done.
It's done.
Over with.
Done. Over. The other thing that I didn't mention about low carb is I don't really carb count. So like this is a unit of insulin. This is a unit of insulin. This might be 2 depending on how much I have. You know, this is 2. This is 1.5. You know, so like there's not a lot of carb counting. And if you don't bolus, you go to 160. You don't go to 240.
Right.
And if you misestimate it, you're still at 140 and not 195. I mean, everyone's different, so I can't speak for everyone, but that's what I found. I won't belabor this too much, but...
Just a quick question. So when you went low carb, did you not feel the need to compensate? Did the proteins not spike you at all?
So I eat pretty moderate protein. So I think the data is pretty good that you shouldn't eat like an enormous quantity of protein. And the body can't handle that much, so I don't eat a ton of protein, you know, just like a small portion per meal.
I think they say more than 4 ounces you have to start, because it's going to, like cavemen, they had animals and they ate that, but then they needed energy. And so somehow meat turned into energy if you ate more than 4 ounces. So there's a way of calculating if you're eating more than 4 ounces of protein, because that does turn into sugar.
Yeah, I mean, and fat too will raise you over time. So it's more, I'm more of what's called an experiential boluser. Like I kind of know that chia pudding is a 1 unit meal. Like I just know that. So that really helps. And obviously days are different, but
Did you ever test it out to see if it lines up with your old carb ratio? Just out of curiosity.
Oh my god, it was so long ago. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, my carb ratio is 1 to 10, so it's like not that dialed in. But again, like it's not that important when you're eating these. I find when you're eating these types of foods.
I know that for me, eating more than 60 carbs, my body said does not compute, and it would go haywire. I knew that many years ago. So I mean, I don't do 60. I eat what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But mine was like a 60 carb max, and otherwise just it would freak out and
Yeah.
had no clue what my system was doing.
Adam, the pediatricians in this world are a little concerned about low carb for
kids,
growing
for
kids.
kids. Yeah.
So just thought I'd throw that out there. For
Yeah,
those of us that
it's a
have-
wonderful point. There is, my answer is to direct you somewhere else, which is there's a community on Facebook that can be a little aggressive, but it's called Type 1 Grit, and
Don't go there.
GRIT, yeah. And it's a lot of parents who have very, very young kids on like way lower carb than I eat, like ketogenic, very low, like 20 grams a day. So, what are the long-term effects of that? But I think these parents, the fact that their parents are willing to do it with their kids, I mean, there are people doing that. So I don't know the data on carbohydrate metabolism and growth that well, so I'm not qualified. I mean,
Brain
Jen, do you have
development,
any thoughts?
They have
Jen's a
pretty-
medical doctor.
Yeah. They have pretty legit research on the type 1 grit. They are intense. Like
Like
I did
4.9 A1Cs.
Yeah, like I did keto for a very long time, and I'm still low carb. And even when I was doing keto, I had to leave the group just because
Yeah.
the mentality. But they have pretty solid research that is pretty convincing. I think the guy who runs the group is a doctor, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the other thing is, talk about cool
Not
recipes. I
Bernstein's,
mean,
the
that's a
other one.
group where there are a lot of neat recipes. So, yeah.
That's-
I know that's not a satisfying answer to your
That's
question.
okay. Just check with your doctor.
Did you have any thoughts, Jen?
I guess, I mean, my only thought is that we know that these glycemic excursions aren't really healthy either.
Yeah.
And I think we just don't know well enough, where it was. When my daughter was diagnosed, it was all about just don't have any hypos, don't worry at all about the highs, basically. I mean, she was 2 years old and it was just don't worry about the highs. Well, then fast forward and now Tandy I was doing those studies on MRIs and all this. I mean, there's a reason why our bodies are supposed to have a glucose in the range that it is, and we don't know all of the things, that happen, and we know there are some things that aren't so good if your glucose is high. And we also know it would be great if you could eat the normal carbohydrate diet that a toddler or a growing kid can do, but you're not going to be able to do both.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that as a medical community there's a consensus as to which one of those is necessarily like pick which one is going to have the better cost benefit. Yeah.
But can I say that for the over 40 years of diabetes, of trying to keep my sugars low, I have had major brain damage from the lows. Now I don't have the high problems. I don't have all the stuff that goes with having the higher complications.
Yeah.
But I know my brain has had major issues because of all the hypoglycemic reactions I've had.
Yeah, that's
You
a
know,
good point.
my
And I
brain
didn't
doesn't
mean
function
to-
as well.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and,
and
I,
I know
and I
that.
didn't mean to say that
No,
it's
but
okay to have lows. I
there's the
guess.
other side
Yeah.
to it. So I'm just
Yeah.
letting
And
people know
to-
that there's that other
And
side.
to tie that all up, highs and lows are less common when you eat fewer carbs because your mistakes are small. So a 30% mistake on a
correctable.
10-unit dose is
Yeah.
3 units. Like that can put me in hypo or in hyper, especially a young child. So
Yeah.
diabetes is all about trade-offs. I mean, that's
Exactly.
life is all about
Yeah,
trade-offs,
right.
right? So I find the trade-off is worth it. Yeah.
But what about for pediatricians? Can't they just add almonds and nuts and things like that so that their sugars aren't going high, but they're getting those carbs? So it's not going so high so fast where they're constantly doing this.
I mean, I think yes, of course you can do that, but you can only do so much with a 2-year-old, right?
Yeah.
I know.
I mean, are they gonna eat the
Almonds.
Nuts.
almonds and
With
cashews?
the chia pudding.
Or do they
No,
eat-
olives, they love to stick their fingers in the olive holes.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
All right, I'm gonna move us
Sorry.
on. We
Okay,
could
good.
talk all day about this. Okay, breakfast we got. Okay, so an example of a landmine. This is kind of the we've all done this, which is the hypoglycemia binge. So I was roommates with someone who worked at Google, and Google has got a lot of free food. And so he had this huge bowl of granola in the fridge, and I was low. You know, I went to bed at 90 or 80 or whatever, doing my job, and woke up super low, and then went to the fridge and ate all the granola, and then, you know, rocket shipped high. And so this is what I call the hypoglycemia binge. Has anyone ever done the hypoglycemia binge? Yeah, right? So how do you avoid this? This is like the textbook example to me of a landmine, because we all know we do this. It's a huge stumbling block. It ruins, like the whole next day is ruined. So how do you build a system to avoid this? So I'll tell you what I do. I just have these go-to corrections. So when I'm low, I do like when I'm low, I do Y. So I have glucose dabs and I have Smarties. And there's a couple reasons why. One is I will not overeat those things because they actually don't really taste that good, and that's the point. So you're not supposed to overeat low treatments. The second is that I know exactly how much these raise my blood sugar, so I can titrate them to the exact amount I need, which is, you know, 1 tab raises me 20 points. So if I'm 80, I need 1 tab. If I'm 60, I need 2 tabs. If I'm 60 and falling, I need 3 tabs. Like, that is really useful for just eating just enough to get back. And then the last is just, you know, don't use hypo as an excuse to eat junk. It's just, I think the funniest part about it is it pairs a reward with something we all want to avoid, which I think is just a bad psychological trap to keep having. Yes?
What's the best thing that you've done? Because, like, that's a big one for me. I know, like, I could easily just be good and eat 2 sugar tabs and be fine. But psychologically, I'm like, well, let's just screw that and throw that out the window and let's eat all the bad. Like, what's your biggest helpful tip that prevents you psychologically from just going to that junk food mode?
Good question. Well, I mean, one thing I do, I have glucose tabs everywhere in my life. I have them in my backpack. I have them in I actually bought a bedside pocket that like slides on the bed, and it's filled with glucose tabs. So I think for me, in the car, you know, by the front door, blah, 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 in all my coats. So I think for me, part of it is like, when I have that pause point, like, oh, I'm low, I can eat something. Like, the pause point is the killer. So for me, having them everywhere kind of avoids my ability to like step into the hypoglycemia binge. But I think it's also just
Yeah,
like
I have
being
mine on
being
me all the
relentless
time.
about it.
So it's not about having that. It's about, ooh, there's something else I could eat.
Yeah. I
Well,
mean,
you know what's really good? Maple syrup and some walnuts. If you know it's a swig of maple syrup out of the bottle and some walnuts, it brings you up. You can have the maple syrup first, but it's a wonderful combination.
Necessarily like what.
you can
No,
binge
but
really
no, but
fast
if
on
it's
maple
one
syrup.
swig and you walk away, right?
Or like people
Yeah, I mean, I think.
maybe
Yeah.
if you have bad maple
No, go ahead so the group can hear.
I was gonna say, I think for the most part, are you, me or her, sorry?
Oh, Courtney.
Oh, I think it's more the emotional, like, or I've
Yeah,
spoke to, or like people who can't control because they're stress eating or whatever, or I've been
Yeah.
told that if you just want food tastes so good and
Right,
you feel
right.
like you want to clear the refrigerator
Yeah.
out, and then how do you know you're supposed to stop,
Yeah.
but like, what are some tips, like, you know, do you go distract yourself,
Yeah.
how do you?
Yeah. I mean, other things that come to mind. I mean, obviously, focusing on avoiding the lows in the first place is also I think a viable strategy for this. Yeah, others, I don't know.
Little
For
snack
me,
bags.
like,
Dates.
I have sugar tabs everywhere, and
Yeah.
I know how, you just 1 for 10 points to me, and that's great, but every once in a while, and I'm not usually somebody to give in, but I'm like, you know what, I am so low, I am so hungry, I'm just gonna do it. But then I'm also aware of what I eat,
Yeah.
and I will bolus. I'm like, I will count my carbs. Like, oh, and like that's helped prevent some of the crazy swings, because otherwise if I just eat, go to bed, I'll have that. But if I'm aware, okay, I just grabbed 2 handfuls of Cheerios and a cup of milk, so I know how many carbs it is, I'm like, I'm gonna need to bolus. So that's what I'll do. Because
Even when you're 60, right? Because you know 45 minutes later, it's gonna start stacking up.
Right.
Right.
I mean, wherever I am. It usually takes a real low for me to really need to eat. And otherwise, I just stick with the glucose tabs. But being aware of it and then bolusing has helped.
Yeah. I mean, also just in the moment, I just try to remember this, and like this will ruin my day, and I don't want to have a ruined day. So maybe that's
Remember
a
the
strategy
crappy
too.
feeling.
Oh yeah, that's why.
What's that?
She says, remember the crappy feeling.
Yeah.
I guess
yeah,
it's
yeah.
just like how to explain to prevent that to like a new diabetic. Even though I'm not new, I know it's gonna happen. At the
Right.
moment, I really don't care.
Right.
Yeah, I think
The last thing you said, I think, is very important. Having the
You know it's gonna
CGM
be-
really helps.
Like you
Uh,
overdid
it's
it.
like real time. The feedback loop is very easy to internalize, I think.
Yeah, except for the fact that the CGM lags.
Yeah. So
So-
that's actually number 4 on this list in the
Yeah.
book. CGM does lag, so it's very easy to overeat off a low. So again, I think having your metric is really helpful too. But you're right. One time overeating and you see this, I mean,
But
hopefully
still, like,
there's the
What is the time scale here? Like from, if you measured at 2,
6 hours.
you measure at 2 and then at 3.
Yeah, and this
It's
was
completely different.
like granola phase was probably here. So yeah, there was quite a lag.
So I just want to add to what you said about preventing the lows. Like I didn't start doing that till I went low carb. Is when I see it trending or low. Like of course, if it's a critical low, then I would correct. But I would suspend. Put temp basal 0%, so I don't forget when I suspend. For depending how low I am at the time, and that will kind of bring me back to my normal range without having to eat something. I feel like once you hit rock bottom, it's hard. It's for
I'm
me,
on-
it's
I'm
hard
on
to
shots,
come back
so
from
I'm
that.
not
Yeah.
pumped, so it's
Yeah, I was
like-
gonna say,
so
be
it's
really
completely
careful
different.
about suspending, only because you need to do it like 45 minutes before the low to really avoid a high after. So
I'm not on a
yeah,
pump
but it's
anyway,
like
so.
yeah, and nor may have a faster response. So yes,
So I do that a lot with my daughter
yeah,
because of the fear of her going even lower, and I feel like the fear outweighs the high. And so we have that all the time, and
Yeah.
I don't know how to stop that.
closed loop is gonna be a game changer for you. Jennifer's nodding. I was just writing up your poster today, the insulin poster. Yeah, closed loop is gonna be awesome for you.
Kids like to have juice and things like that, right? It's very, and they go low. That's the opportunity for me to even give the kids a juice or something they like to drink, right?
I think juice is fine. It's easy to have too much juice. So, one mini juicy juice box that actually might be too much for depending on how young your kid is. I don't know, but yeah, I think the key is just it's got to be the right quantity. So, orange juice is like a rocket ship. If you like 8 ounces of orange juice is way too much for me to correct a low. So, I think figuring out how much you need and then having a container that will serve that much is useful. Yeah.
But what I found is the best way to go on something like this, which is a formula for doing something, and a formula I don't like to use because I do like to eat junk food, when I get the opportunity, is to do it once, take a week and just say, this week I will do it right. This week I will do it right. And then the next formula that comes up, I say, okay, this week I will do it right. And the thing is, most of them, once I do it, and I'm just sitting there, I gotta get through this week. It's not yet Sunday, I gotta keep going. I gotta keep doing it right. Once I get through that, I find it a lot easier to get into doing it when I need to do it.
But I think it's different when you're dealing with a baby or not a baby, because she doesn't like the tabs. She refuses.
Yeah.
So you're stuck with
Right.
juice, right?
Yeah.
You're stuck with
Grapes.
what they'll take.
Well, a marshmallow.
8
One marshmallow.
But even in the
10
middle of the
grapes.
night, Like I just put the straw and she just starts drinking.
Right.
Sometimes she
Yeah.
overdrinks it and then it's like, oh.
I mean,
So
I
if you
know
do just a half a cup,
some people
half a
too
cup
would
is
use
15 carbs.
Yeah,
So just
we
give
do,
her the
but we
half
have little
cup.
kids, so we use the 14 carb boxes.
Yeah.
They have mini boxes.
The 14 carbs.
Yeah.
Also, I don't know
Juicy.
if anyone in the room, but is it the Extend bars that used to do the like uncooked cornstarch? And who's used those? Yeah, yeah. So that could be good for like preventing overnight lows.
Where's that?
Have you used those tomorrow? Who said yes?
We don't use them very often.
Yeah, they're pretty vile.
They're called Extend, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they
They
don't
taste like corn powder.
They're all.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe not tasty for your daughter.
So we have we have IKEA plastic cups, and we were heading to Sweden one time, and I thought, how am I going to measure juice in Sweden? So I took a Sharpie and I marked the half cup mark on it, and it is still on those darn cups.
Nice.
And she is so programmed that she pours to that line.
Yeah.
That's perfect, huh?
It's great. It's great.
Yeah,
And so
it's-
even at night, when I used to treat Lowe's at night, I would pour into that cup and stick the straw in her mouth, and she would drink it.
Yeah, I love that too because it again eliminates the decision point,
Right.
which is the killer when you're low.
Right.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, I'm gonna move us on. We can talk about this all day. Okay, so this is the second chapter in the book because you kind of have to put food first in the diabetes book, I thought. But this is my favorite chapter. It's so rich and awesome. So let me go through some of the stuff. This goes back to what I was talking about earlier, where most of the time in diabetes we focus on avoiding these long-term outcomes. I think this is really hard, especially, parents I think have an easier time with this, but kids, teenagers, this is really difficult. But any of us, like if we're feeling burned out, I think it's easy to kind of blow off diabetes because it's such a long-term marathon. So one of the first bright spot in the mindset chapter is this idea of a time shift. And coming up with today reasons to take care of my diabetes, I think are very powerful for getting through that burnout and exhaustion and tiredness. So, why does taking care of my diabetes benefit me today? Or why does it benefit me right now? And I wish someone had told me this when I was a teenager. They could have said, hey, you'll be a better student, a better athlete when your blood sugar's in range. You'll be better to your family members when your blood sugar's in range. And maybe I actually would have cared a lot more about my diabetes. It sucks to be around me when my blood sugar is high or low. I mean, that picture is kind of like how I feel. And I don't want the people around me to have to deal with sucky me, because it's not. I was talking to Scott Benner, who runs a podcast, and he said, you are not authentically you when your blood sugar is out of range. Like, you are artificial you. You're not real you. So I want to be real me. So I try to think about this as me with my siblings. So, being a good brother, like my blood sugar needs to be in range. Being a good boyfriend, my blood sugar needs to be in range. Doing good work at my job, So to me, this is such an incredible motivator because it's today, so it's relevant now. And it's people around me, which is a very powerful motivator. It's always easy to kind of blow off your own care. But it's much harder when your own decisions impact people you love around you. So I use that all the time to get through the marathon of diabetes. Another one that I focus a lot on in the chapter is this idea that numbers are a grade. So we call them tests, right? Who likes taking tests and getting bad grades every day, which is kind of like what diabetes is, when you're getting numbers that you don't expect. So I always use the word check. Check is not a test. And blood sugar numbers are not a test, so it's easy to feel like, I ate what looked like a healthy meal, I went up to 226, I'm a failure, I'm terrible at this, curse word. And I think the key is viewing blood sugar numbers like a speedometer on a car. It's objective information and data to drive a decision.
Just a number.
It's just a number. And this I think is maybe one of the toughest psychological flips to make, because if you're a type A person, the numbers do feel like a grade. So the analogy I give in the book is if I was a pilot and I'm flying a plane and I look on my dashboard and I see that the plane is going off course or the plane is going too fast, I don't look at that and say, like, I'm a crappy pilot because my plane is not flying correctly. The pilot takes the information and changes something in the plane, and then they keep flying. And I think this is how we should view blood sugar data. it's data, it's objective information. It's not a grade on my performance or how well I'm doing as a person with diabetes. And I talk a lot in the book and in my column about all the factors that affect blood sugar. So when we're diagnosed, we hear diet and exercise and medication, but there are at least 22, and I've gotten factors that affect blood sugar, and people have emailed me more, and I think there's more like 30 or 40 or 50 that affect blood sugar. So stress, sleep, getting an accurate number on the meter, periods for women, all kinds of stuff that impacts blood sugar numbers. And it's impossible to control all of them as a person with diabetes, so you will have out-of-range blood sugars, and feeling judged on them is just not productive, I've found. Yes?
How did you help convince yourself of that fact or statement, I guess?
Yeah. So, I still get frustrated when I get a 200 and, because I'm on top of it, I'm super type A. I think what helps is, again, remembering how much of diabetes is out of my control. So even if I'm a control freak, I just can't get all the permutations. I can't control for all of them. So let me skip ahead. I think I have this in here.
So kind of more like what's the next move versus focusing on the number, which is the next move kind of
It
thing.
just tells you what to do next.
This is a good example, right? So this was a couple weeks ago. I got up really early in the morning to do a radio show, and I got 4.5 hours of sleep. I was kind of nervous because it was live radio, which I've never done, so it was weird.
Total anxiety.
Total anxiety, and I had a giant. I love green tea, so I had a giant French press of green tea, but I had nothing else, right? I woke up at 90. What am I gonna bolus for that? So, should I feel angry about this blood sugar? No, none of that is in my control, right? How could I? I could have gone to sleep earlier, but I didn't. So, I just take the data point and I do something about it. But there's a graphic in the book, I forget what page it's on, but it's in the mindset chapter, and it lists all the factors that affect blood sugar, and I'm just always reminding myself of that. Even if I do everything right, this still might happen. And that's just kind of the cards that we're all dealt with the tools that we have right now. But the nice thing is with automated insulin delivery, with better diabetes data, some of the hidden patterns are going to start to become more noticeable. And so I think increasingly technology will help with this kind of stuff. Because if I was wearing an automated system, it would have started ramping insulin, and maybe the high would have been less significant. And if I had been wearing a sleep tracking device paired with it, it would have known, this kind of thing happens. So, I don't know. Does that answer your question? I would. Have you read the book yet?
No, I haven't read it.
You'll just go straight to the mindset chapter.
Okay.
Read it through.
Because I'm still on MDI. My Dexcom is out of commission right now, so for me, I'm just kind of still beginner diabetes. I've never been on a pump or anything like that. So
Yeah, I think. Yeah.
But also the 187 for that little bit of time, which is going to be maybe, let's say, 2-3 hours of above, let's say, 150.
Yeah.
That's not big in the great scheme of things.
Yeah.
That's nothing compared to people that are, above 180, 200s, 300s, days down and constant, and the lows and the highs. So this, in comparison,
that would be
is
wonderful
so,
for me, because I am one of those people that's up and down.
Yeah, and so for that we say, all right, that's okay, because it's kind of short term. Rather, all the up and down, you have a great A1C, but you're in the 300, you're in the 29. I've gotten to a 29, and A1C looks great. The doctor's like, oh no, I'm in 400s and 29. That's not okay. And that 187 for that period of time says, it's just a number, and it's just that little bit of time. So, if you can get those, that time period of lower, give yourself a break,
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's just a number. Put it on your meter. It'll help. Jeff Hitchcock says the only bad blood sugar is the one you don't know. I think is also really good. So.
Or what
this
you don't do about
even
it.
if you're a type A person, this is one of the hardest, I think, psychological flips, and you just have to be relentless about it. And I remember the pilot analogy. I always remember that huge list of factors that affects blood sugar. And then there are some other stress things in the book, like, you know, will I remember this moment in a year?
Yeah, I like the pilot analogy because it just completely takes out the emotional part and
Yeah.
just takes in, like, what do you do?
Yeah. Yeah, so in the 187, I mean, I probably just went for a walk after that interview and, you know, what can I do right now to fix this number and then get on with my day?
And you didn't bolus for the 187? Or you bolused and walked?
I can't remember.
Okay, okay. Yeah.
Adam, are you on a pump?
Okay.
Hey, Adam,
Yeah,
quick question. The Dexcom, one of the things that I've always been puzzled about is I love everything that you're saying about this, but the way that Dexcom changes color when
Yeah.
you're in the different ranges, I feel like that is almost a opposite message as what you're describing.
A judgment.
It feels
It's
a
made
little
a
bit like
judgment.
that to me, but I'm just wondering, since the,
Yep.
you know, everything you're saying makes so much sense, and one of the things when I see that Dexcom, I'm just a little bit like, oh, what do you know?
Yeah,
Does that
it
bug
would
you
be
at all?
it would be cool if they colors. People feel very strongly about colors, so
Do you like the fact, I mean, I guess the way,
I prefer yellow for high than red. Let's put it that way.
yeah.
I think that's good.
And I guess
It would be nice if you could toggle that on and off, maybe.
Mhm.
Maybe the user could decide, like, I want the colors, I like them. I mean, I do get the Dexcom data now on the watch, which I think is a little bit less, I mean, it's a little bit less aggressive yellow in your face. Even when you're high, I think the numbers are in yellow, but everything else is black, so that helps too. But it is a really good point. Like, the display of glucose data actually impacts how you feel about it.
Yeah.
So I actually really like the Essentia meters because those are just black on white, so there's no color
Yeah.
associated with it. But I think some people do like the colors, so.
You can put your iPhone on grayscale if you want.
Ooh,
Oh, funny.
It
super
looks
brilliant.
shitty in all the other apps, but
Oh, it's so good. Or you
on
could
the
have a
iPhone, you can put your whole screen in grayscale.
I mean, I guess you could set your alarm thresholds higher and lower, but that kind of defeats the purpose of wearing a CGM. So
Yeah. I just.
Libre doesn't have colors, so that's coming
Yeah.
soon. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna move us on. This is something that I became a really big fan of. It's in the mindset chapter. It's called the 5-minute journal. I actually learned this from Tim Ferriss, who's a person that I listen to a lot. And it actually takes 5 minutes to fill out. In the morning, you say, "I'm grateful for what would make today great." Daily effort, like I am, you know, calm, excited, happy. I'm gonna be, you know, a great speaker one day, or whatever it is. And then in the evening, you say 3 amazing things that happened today. How could I have made today even better? It literally takes 5 minutes every day, and I would say it's like one of the best $20 purchases that I've made in a year. So I think especially if you have trouble with just feeling like you're judging yourself all the time or unhappy about your days, I think this is a really useful tool. I also use the Breathe app on the Apple Watch, which I also just do for 5 minutes in the morning. And this is kind of a bigger theme in the book, which is it's very easy to be all or nothing with things in health and with diabetes. So like an hour of exercise or 0. Meditating for 25 minutes or 0. And I think we don't think small enough. So we're in Silicon Valley, it's all about thinking big, but I think a lot of habits and routines in diabetes is all about thinking really small. So I can't do an hour, but can I do 5 minutes? Because 5 minutes is better than 0, and 0 is what I would normally do on a busy day. So I talk about that in the exercise chapter, but overall, the 5 minutes, we could call it the 5 minutes rule. Like, can I do it for 5 minutes? Can I walk for 5 minutes? Can I do a 5-minute journal? Can I breathe for 5 minutes? Helps me a lot. This is actually a point on families. I don't talk a ton about this, but I do think the people around you can be a huge motivator. And in terms of relationships with people around you, you know, I think it really helps especially when the parent or when the loved one understands what it's like to live with diabetes. So wearing the devices, checking blood sugar, counting carbs, doing all those sorts of things, like a day of diabetes, I think really helps build empathy. If, you know, obviously for parents of young kids, it may not be necessary because you're doing all that stuff anyways, but Or when, you know, girlfriends and loved ones can do that, I think it really helps you understand what people go through. It's funny, when people read this book, I had someone text me the other day and say, I can't believe how much math you have to do every day. It's unbelievable. And I was like, yeah, and most people don't do the math. That's why it's a problem. So I think when people get a better sense of what living with diabetes is like, it really helps build that empathy in relationships. Not using BG numbers to finger point is something we already talked about. Being objective and action-oriented with the communication. So high blood sugar, like what can we do about it? Should we take a bolus? Can we go for a walk? Being objective about the data and then doing something about it rather than lumping on a lot of judgment, I think helps. And I do think it's helpful when the person with diabetes sets boundaries. So, for instance, I really like when my girlfriend, like I give her full permission to be the diabetes police. So if she's having tortilla chips and I'm about to reach for them, like I give her full permission to tell me, don't eat that. Because I actually really like that guardrails, but other people that might get on your nerves. So I think it's helpful to, when the person with diabetes can set those boundaries in the relationship and say like, this is what's really helpful, this is what gets on my nerves, this is what helps my bright spots, you know, helps me have more bright spots, this is what helps, you know, this is what drives landmines and feeling crappy, I think is really useful. Does anyone have thoughts or best practices on this? Yes?
I heard a young woman with type 1, she was diagnosed when she was young, and she said that when she was dating, the guy really wouldn't take an interest, wouldn't help out, wouldn't really do much, and then she realized it was because of her. Because she was kind of acting like it was no big deal and not talking to them about it and teaching them about it, so she realized that she needed to step up and say, you know, pretty much what you just said, that she needed to, you know, explain what it was and let them know. But it was, she was actually setting the tone, and she didn't realize it, you know, until, you know, several relationships later.
And I think all of us want to be like, I got this. I don't need your help. I got this. But sometimes, like, I have a quote from Brene Brown, who's done, if people are familiar with her work, she does a lot of work on vulnerability. And can I just actually, oh wait, here's the book.
So the book is in my car,
Okay.
The Gifts of Imperfection.
Yeah, so good.
It's a wonderful book.
Yeah, let me find-
Connection and gratitude.
Yeah, it's an awesome book.
It's a really, really.
I really want to find the exact quote, because I'll just butcher it if I don't. Do other people have thoughts on this while I look for this?
I had my husband wear my CGM for a week.
Nice.
Yeah. I was
Now,
very,
but
very-
how do you do that? You hook them up with the sensor instead of you?
Yep. I want him to know what it felt like to live with it for a week, and
And to
then I
look
could
at
be
the
jealous
numbers.
of, you know, his constant line like that. But you know, but he was checking it throughout the day at work, and what I haven't done yet is somebody suggested to me to do a pump break on a weekend and have your loved one actually do all the carb counting and bolusing for you to get them involved. I haven't done that yet, but I also realized after so long that I don't trust him enough to let him do that. But I also realized that I didn't allow him. I was like, I need to teach him. It's like I got really, really sick recently, and I was like, wow, like what if I get to these points where I can't take care of myself?
Right.
So I've taught my husband now, as long as I'm not around and looking over his shoulder, he's not stressed. He can actually feel my insulin pump.
But they shake.
I'm near-
putting your pump in, you know, it's like, I can't get it in. Oh, you're shaking. Push harder.
But it's just
Okay,
like
yeah.
having them do that and be more involved has been a big. It's trained that he carb counts for me too. I'm like, all right, babe, how many carbs do you think it is? And we're both like right on. So that's been a big help.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually, this is one of my favorite
Yeah.
quotes in the whole book that I included. The biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. So it's so easy to just not talk about this stuff. The quote I was looking for is, somehow we've come to equate success with not needing anyone. Many of us are willing to extend a helping hand, but we're very reluctant to reach out for help when we need it ourselves. It's as if we've divided the world into those who offer help and those who need help. The truth is that we are both. That's good.
And it, Renee says that?
Yeah, that's in
Oh,
that
okay.
book. Yeah.
But in the other book, not the one about the Gifts of
I think it's in that one actually. Yeah.
Okay.
I was listening to it on audio, and so I replayed that section like multiple times, and then I typed it out.
Got it in my post.
So, my mom, and she thinks she understands or tries to understand, but she really has no clue. So I would always bring like candy or goodies over, and she was like, well, I don't want you eating those at my house. You shouldn't eat those. And she would yell at me. I'm like, well, stop telling me what to eat, because it really pisses me off. It makes me want to eat more. So like now we have an agreement.
Nice.
Like at her house, I just don't bring those things. Like every once in a while if I have one, because like one time my dad told me, he's like my stepdad was like, well, you can't have cake. And I was just like, you better give me the biggest slice on that pot, like, cake ever. Because I was like, how do you dare tell me I can't have cake? So, like, she was like, well, it scares me to death. I cry and I think you're going to die. I'm like, well, I don't know that's how you feel because you don't tell me.
Right.
So now that she's told me, I can at least respect her feeling. Okay, well, you're not just telling me inconsiderately not to eat junk food. You're telling me because it scares the living shit out of you. So
for people who are into this stuff, I totally am. There's a really good book called Crucial Conversations. I think it's by 4 authors actually, and it's all about this kind of stuff. Like, how do you have those super tough conversations that you don't really want to have? Highly recommend. Okay, I'm gonna move on. Okay, so this gets to kind of some of the burnout stuff, feeling crappy. One thing I really advise is just listening to the sound of the questions that you're asking yourself, especially when you see numbers or things that you're not expecting, because I was at least surprised by the questions I asked. This is kind of Tony Robbins-esque for people who know his stuff. He talks a lot about what are like questions, quality questions create a quality life. So the questions that you ask are really, really important. So how can you reframe your question? So one of my mindset landmines is these unproductive, defeating, self-blaming, shitty questions. Why did this happen to me? Why is diabetes so unfair? How is this possible? I did everything right today. How could I be so lame and forget to do that again? Why did I do this to myself? And I think it's all about reframing these in the moment. So what can I learn from this? What is one small thing going well? Is there anything I can do differently tomorrow? What experiments can I try? You get the idea. There's actually longer lists of these in the book, but this is again one of those things that you have to police yourself on. So it's intuitive to, especially if you're a type A person, to beat yourself up when things aren't going well, but the questions can really lift you up or tear you down, and it's easy to ask questions that tear you down. So I'm a huge proponent of this kind of stuff. All right, exercise. The first bright spot in the exercise chapter is walking, and I think we live in a culture where exercise is like intense soul cycle, dripping with sweat on the floor, CrossFit, and I think walking is totally undervalued as a strategy for diabetes. And this is just a walk to work, like from 200 right down to 100, and it's just, I use it all the time after meals, especially if I'm trending high. I go for a walk, and it avoids having to take insulin, having to figure out how much insulin to take. It gets me outside, it lifts my spirits, blah blah blah. So I tend to drop about, everyone's different, but I tend to drop about 1 point per minute when I walk, so minus 20 points for 20 minutes. But if I take an insulin recently, or I'm walking uphill, maybe it's 2 milligrams per deciliter per minute. So again, everyone's different. But I'm a big fan of, if you're motivated by data and you're a chipper, like the Fitbit, Apple Watch, really highly recommend them for getting you to walk more.
You have an unfair advantage working in San Francisco.
It's true. It's funny, like I was telling Tamar, when I got here, Two anecdotes really quick. When I got here, I went for a bike ride earlier today, but I haven't walked much, so I just parked at the Caltrain station and walked over instead of with the box.
I saw him down the street.
So it's like walking is it's yet another one of these things. It's just like the small stuff. And then the other day, Priscilla and I went to do errands. We went to get some food, and we did grocery shopping. And I was at like 4,700 steps in the parking lot. And she went in to order food, and then had to go into Target, and I just like paced the parking lot with our dog, and I got 10,000 steps. Like, we got to the parking lot, I was at 4,700, and I just paced the parking lot, and we got 10,000 steps. So I just think this just takes like dedicated effort, but you can fit walking in all kinds of weird ways. And 2 of my favorites are, we have a treadmill desk at our office actually, and you can do a DIY one. I also really want to get a biking desk. They're like $150, but super useful. Also, adopting a dog is a really good way to walk if you're into that sort of thing. Highly recommended. So, he's nodding. Anyways, walking I'm a big fan of. This I've already talked about, so I don't have an hour, so I can't exercise, and we've all said this, it's easy to make this excuse. I think exercise is also one of the easiest things to cut out when life gets really busy. It's easy to just like push exercise out because you can always cut it out of your day. And so, again, the 5-minute rule, like, can I do 5 minutes? If I can do 5 minutes, that's better than 0, and 0 is what I would do on a busy day. So that's when I remember this, I always do 5 minutes of exercise because I'm never busy enough that I don't have 5 minutes. Even if I have to make a phone call, I can go on a 5-minute walk.
I was also reading somewhere, and this woman just says, every hour, get up and for 20 seconds, jump, run, step, whatever. Because as cavemen, that's what they did.
Okay, let's do that now. Come on, get up.
Right, exactly. And every hour, 20
no one's getting up. Everyone's still sitting.
20 seconds.
There we go. Yeah.
I'll get it. Right? And just, for 20 seconds is kind of a long time, but you've just done that, and you've gotten yourself exercised, and you've gotten more fit. Your muscles are there.
Yeah, actually,
there's
20
seconds is nothing, but we got to remember.
There's actually, if you're into this, there's really cool research on just how sitting and being sedentary affects your, at a cellular level, your cells change because they're just sitting. It's totally mind-blowing stuff. So definitely recommend that.
Okay.
Well,
I shake my legs.
So one mindset that helps, I find, is if maybe it doesn't work for everyone, but if you're kind of a coupon hunter or rebate hunter, just view exercise as free. You would be foolish not to take this free stuff. Well, why don't you take the free exercise in the stairs rather than take the elevator? Why don't you take the free 3 minutes of walk to go have a meeting with somebody on another floor instead of doing a phone call or a video conference?
Yeah.
So it's
and the other thing is that stuff counts as exercise. We don't classify walking as exercise, but another thing I do. This is actually a weighted vest, so it's a 20-pound weighted vest. So if walking is too easy, add a weighted vest, it gets a lot more difficult. And again, I like combining activities, so doing calls while walking, calling family while walking, listening to podcasts, things like that. I love that. Okay, a few more. I can tell people are getting a little restless. We're just walking. This is a mistake that I make all the time. It's a landmine in the exercise chapter. And exercise shuts down your digestion. So it's easy to eat too close to exercise and then go low during exercise, and then the food hits when you finish, and then you go high. This pattern is also what it looks like when you suspend an insulin pump too close to exercise. You will go low during and then high after, because insulin also has that time lag delay. So when I press a button on my pump, nothing is going to happen to my blood sugar for at least an hour-ish, is what most people say. So suspending insulin is a fine strategy to avoid lows if you do it an hour in advance. But otherwise, I tend to see this rebound high. The same is true for eating too close to exercise. So it's all about shifting the curve forward, which means eating something to get the glucose up to a good point, or suspending the pump well in advance of exercise to avoid the low.
I'm going to like your book.
What's that?
I'm going to like your book. I like this one. Thank you.
Awesome.
But when
Surely.
I exercise, my sugar goes high.
Your sugar goes high.
And I don't understand whether
Yeah.
I eat or not. I can't figure that out.
Yeah, so if everyone heard that, she says what kind of exercise do you do?
Whether it's aerobic, swimming.
Any kind. Yeah.
Almost anything.
Yeah, so she's saying her blood sugar goes up when she exercises.
And I
so,
need insulin.
So this to your point, this is yet another one of those just damn things. I'm supposed to exercise to lower my glucose and it goes up. What is
Yeah,
that?
I've had that, but I've also been 44 and still running on the treadmill and have no clue.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so I mean, what sucks too is that it's pretty hard to predict. So I find that time of day is actually a pretty big driver for me. So if I exercise in the morning, I tend to rise. And I tend to rise for strength training, but drop for cycling. And I see a smaller drop in the morning than in the evening. So I do think time of day plays a big role. And also food within the last, say, 12 hours. So if I'm more fasted versus less, that seems to have an impact too. So it's a huge, ugly ball of wax. But I think the best thing you can do is just use glucose data and try different food strategies, try different timing, and see what works. And you just do it for a week. Like, you don't have to track this for
I've
ever.
tried for a couple of years now.
Yeah,
And
so-
I have to take my pump off to swim,
Yeah.
and then, in the shower, and it just cruises.
Yeah.
So I can't set a higher basal for that,
Oh.
because I've
What if
taken
you-
the pump off.
What if you brought insulin in syringes and then took an injection?
Well, I take an injection a little bit before,
Okay.
so that suspension
Yeah, doesn't count.
doesn't count.
Right. But then you still go
Kicks
high.
in 45 minutes, but yeah, it's like,
But the nice thing is that sounds like a pretty clear pattern to me, which means you can solve that. What's hard is if you sometimes go high and sometimes go low. That's not very easy to solve.
and that happens
But if
too.
but if you pretty much always go high, then I think you can plan around that. Like, you could.
I'm not
Do you
good at that.
compensate for the suspension? Because usually, like, if you suspend for any time more than an hour, and then you reconnect, you need to bolus the amount that you would have basal during that time.
So
And maybe more.
So I bolus so that that's going to start taking place while I'm swimming. So that once I'm finished with the shower, it's set and it's working. But then 9:30, 10 o'clock, and I'm like, whether I ate, whether I didn't eat, it just kind of always happens.
But if it
I'm
always
not-
happens, you can take insulin for that, right? That I think is the key. So, like, observing a pattern and then trying different things to
And
solve
taking,
the pattern.
and taking more, it's just, yeah,
I mean, the other thing is some exercise just raises your blood sugar, like, on its own.
yeah.
So it might be unrelated to, like, it might just be stress and cortisol and exercise recovery. So, anyways, okay, let's do sleep and then we're done. I think sleep, I actually have a column coming out that shares this excerpt from the book, but I think we talk about exercise, we talk about food, we talk about medication, but I think sleep is often an afterthought in diabetes as a specific strategy to improve blood sugar. So I find huge differences in next day blood sugars when I get seven or more hours of sleep. You saw that picture earlier, this is 4.5 and I didn't do anything and I just went off the radar. So sleep, I think, is an underutilized strategy for improving blood sugar. And the book is mostly about, like, how do I get more sleep and how do I get better sleep. But the thing I find too is blood sugar during sleep impacts next day blood sugars. So if I run high all night, I tend to be more likely to be high the next day. And if I'm low all night, I tend to be more low the next day. So that's something to keep in mind too. But what sucks for type 1s is it's pretty hard to nail blood sugar during sleep, which is where closed loop is going to be fantastic because it does do this kind of thing.
I flatline. It's wonderful. My basal is just
Okay.
enough, so I flatline. But then,
Another thing about blood sugars during sleep, I find dinner is a huge driver and dinner timing is a big driver. So when I have a lighter dinner and then don't eat afterwards, the blood sugars are so much more in range than if I'm snacking up until bed. Even if it's free foods, I still am, going up as I sleep.
is
But-
that due to digestion, just the later processing of the digestion?
Well, I think our bodies just aren't designed to be, like, eating really late into the night in general. The other thing though is that when they do closed loop studies, so they automate the insulin delivery based on the CGM. I think this is very refreshing. Some nights people need half as much insulin as their pre-programmed rate. Sometimes they need twice as much. And so for all of us, walking around with one basal rate every single night it's absurd. It's not even physiologic. And you can't really plan for it up front because it's every 5 minutes the system is making a determination. So I think closed loop is going to totally revolutionize sleeping because people universally report better sleep, more time in range, more restfulness, that sort of thing. So stay tuned on that, unless you're on the 670, maybe you already have it.
Have you noticed dreaming having an effect?
Oh, dreaming? I don't know.
I
I personally have others in the room. Dreaming and...
I
what
don't
should-
have enough data to know for sure, but it seems like sometimes I dip during the night and it seems to correlate to like
Well, the
Well,
brain
dreams
is
change
a
every 7 minutes. So you have a different dream every 7 minutes. So maybe it's the type of dream that you have.
well. I was gonna say
You have dreams only in REM states?
I was gonna say the brain is a massive consumer of glucose.
Well, that's
like,
the thing.
so maybe it's related to that.
It would make sense, I think.
I don't know. Okay, well, so this is just the wrap-up slide. I think that this is the quote actually that begins the book, and I think it summarizes the book really beautifully, which is that bright spots are more important than landmines, and we should all be searching for them and cloning them, finding ways to do them more often. And I love this quote. It's by the guy who founded Nielsen Market Research, but it works perfectly for the book. So that's it. And I would just say as takeaways, experiment. Think of your diabetes like a scientist. Try different things. See the impact. Try to find your bright spots and landmines and figure out ways to have them more often. Use that data think of it as a partner, not an enemy, and use it like a pilot would to change something on the way that the plane is flying. And I think, we all just have to police our mindsets because it's we're all wired to be negative, and I talk about this in the intro. So you just have to be aware of that and try, lump these tactics on and use others. So that's all. Yes, questions?
So what chapter, for someone who just kind of like needs to reset and reboot, what chapter is your favorite kind of to start focus on that seems to be the easiest to not get set up for failure kind of thing, like get frustrated with, and what's your favorite bright spot about it?
Mindset. Yeah.
Okay.
Mindset.
What's your favorite?
And the today reasons. Actually, the two that I shared, the today reasons and the data one. Yeah. So the mindset chapter will take you 1 hour to read, so it's a good investment. By the way, do people get Diatribe?
Yes.
People get it? Okay. You can sign up for free. You'll get an email once every 2-ish weeks with all of the latest things happening in diabetes. I read a column in Diatribe. We share, here's Insulet's new Omnipod dash system to add touchscreen and Bluetooth. So we share all the things happening. We sometimes do bigger pieces, like here's all the closed loop devices in development. And obviously you all got a book. If you didn't get a book, take one on the way out. Okay, there's just one favor I would ask you. So Tamar talked about it at the beginning, but writing a book is a lot of work. And I donated all of that time, and the book is free, so you can get it as a free PDF. You can pay $0 and get an amazing book for free. The print copy is on Amazon for $6, and that's actually at cost. So Diatribe makes nothing from that, and I make nothing from that. And that's because my goal with this is to help people. That's all that I care about. So every day I look at the metric, how many people have the book. By the end of the year, I want 25,000 people to have the book because 90% of books don't get more than 25,000 copies sold. So to me, that's a very cool metric to say, this is a top 10% book that's in the hands of more than 25,000 people. So getting it to people free was a very big priority for me. But I only ask that you do two things. One, if you think it is useful, please share it with people. Tell your endocrinologist, buy copies for people that you know that have diabetes. They're only $6. This is the link to get the PDF. It's obviously on Amazon. And if you find it useful, just please write an Amazon review. You need not have purchased the book on Amazon to write one, and you can only write one sentence. But I just want to get over 100 reviews. I feel like that's a credibility line. We're at 66, 97% 5 stars. So please just write a review. Those are the only two things I would ask. You can tell I'm such a geek about the metrics. Yeah, anyways, thank you.
Thank you.
So you spoke about the effect of sleep on our blood sugars, but do you have any information on kind of the reverse?
Yeah, I think it's bidirectional.
Okay.
So I sleep worse when my blood sugars are out of range, and when my blood sugars are out of range, sorry.
I get what you mean.
You get what I'm saying?
Yeah,
When I sleep poorly, my blood sugars are poor, and when my blood sugars are poor, I sleep poorly. It goes both ways. So my recommendation is try to keep blood sugar in range while you're asleep, and also get at least 7 hours of sleep.
And the more sleep you can get before midnight, the better.
Never heard that.
Yeah, I've heard the. I
Huh.
think it's actually before 10.
Huh.
For 10?
Before 10
Oh.
p.m.
Yeah. So I actually
Some
I
are
didn't
just
I
getting
didn't-
going
I
at
didn't
10.
mention
Like
this.
10 p.m.
This is
next day.
this
Starting
is
from 2 a.m. to.
this is what I do. So I am a night owl, but I aspire to be a morning person, which is actually a very bad combination. So I have 2 alarms on my phone. I tried this with 1 alarm, but it doesn't work. You need 2. One is a yellow light alarm at 9:30, which says like, bedtime's coming up, time to get ready. And then 10:30 is what I call the red light alarm. So that's like, I need to start getting ready for bed. And it helps to, I think 2 is key because 1, you can just shut off and keep doing what you're doing. So I actually respond to 2. And having a loved one who's also committed to getting more sleep helps a lot too.
And also, all the distractions of the blue lights, the TVs, the radios, the
Yeah.
computers, that really messes up your sleep-wake cycle.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, so do
by
you have-
not doing that after 9 is fairly reasonable.
If you do you have an iPhone? Yeah, so use
iPhone does the
night,
bedtime.
night shift mode
yeah,
is really good. I use Flux on my computer. It's FLUX. It's a free app, and it changes the color temperature on your screen automatically as the sun sets, so that there's less blue light. And then the sleep chapter has tons of little stuff like timing of caffeine has a big impact on different people. Yeah, there's a bunch. Amount of ambient light in the room. There's
I've heard a lot
lots of easy ways to improve sleep.
Yeah, talk about just having the router on the house, like switch
Oh,
it
wow.
on. Like, oh yeah, that's just a whole other level. That's like baby steps, like baby steps.
Well, the hard part is having the phone, which is your CGM, right next to you. Yes, we don't have to have it on our pillow,
That's
Yeah.
always under me.
but it's got to be kind of inside.
I put mine in airplane mode every night.
And you can still do your CGM, and that's going to alarm you.
Mhm.
In
Where do you put it?
airplane mode?
Sorry, where do you
I
put
put it in airplane mode every night. My phone.
it? Really? The Dexcom still works? Is it on there?
And you
Just have
can
to
see your
re-enable it.
Dexcom numbers.
Re-enable what?
The Bluetooth. Oh, like.
Yeah, so you flip on airplane mode. I mean, I'm happy to do it right now, and people can come up after
No,
and
that's
test it.
all right.
But
I thought
yeah,
airplane mode
you put it in airplane mode. It'll shut everything off, and then you just toggle Bluetooth back on, and then you'll get your data. And even the data will upload to Clarity once it gets cell connection again. So highly recommend that.
Yeah. I mean, I put it on vibrate now, so it doesn't alarm, it just vibrates.
Have you personally done a study on getting too much sleep, or do you not have time for too much sleep?
Do you get too much? I want too much.
Occasionally.
So no, I haven't. But I've seen mortality data where they compare like people who get too little sleep and too much sleep, and from those, I mean, there's weaknesses obviously in looking at people observationally, but getting too much sleep does not seem to be a good thing and might be a bad thing based on the data I've seen. But most people need, so they say like 7 to 8 is kind of a nice sweet spot, and people getting like 12 hours of sleep per night, which I'm not really sure who does, that seems to be associated with worse outcomes. But again, it's associations. So the other thing though is that people have very different sleep thresholds. So some people do really well on 6.5, and some people need 8.5.
See, I do really bad when I oversleep. Like
Yeah.
if I get 5-6 hours of sleep, I do way better than I do if I had 8 hours of sleep.
You're lucky.
But my child does not stop all day, so my mind is like killing me when my body's like not ready to go to bed. And getting her to sleep, she does so much better with way more sleep. So it's kind of like I have to lay down with her, but then I get tired, but then I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning.
You're ready to go.
Because it's like if I go to bed with her at 8:30, 9 o'clock, 6 hours later, it's 3 a.m.
Wow, but think of how much stuff you could do.
Yeah.
And not
I'm
wake up my
so
child.
envious. You could take
And not
classes.
wake up your child, exactly.
You
yeah,
could write
yeah.
a book. You
Yoga
could start a
for an hour.
podcast.
But I feel like I don't get actually like good sleep, but
Yeah.
because it's broken. Because then my sleep hours, like I'll go to sleep with her, maybe wake up an hour or two later, go to bed,
But do you-
at 12, 1
Do
o'clock.
you feel great when you wake up at 3?
Yeah, I do.
You should embrace that. Do it. Go crush the day. I'm so jealous. I really wish I could be like that.
I'm
Is your daughter?
she's almost 4. But
I mean, one thing this is an anecdote, but one thing I learned from this project is it's really surprising what you can accomplish if you just chip away at it. So I just would work on this before my day job, like for a year. It's just what I did, and wrote a book.
See, but I'm like an all or nothing person.
Right, which is
Which
not
I need
helpful.
to fix.
Yeah.
Adam, going back to your negative questions,
Yeah.
what would be a good response to a little one when she says, "Why do I have diabetes? Why me? Why not my siblings?" I haven't.
We don't know. It's kind of the luck of the draw. It's just,
I know, but she's so not satisfied with that.
but
She
that's
cries
all
and
you
she said, all you can do is
But that's all you
empathize.
can say.
I
is
break
you-
down.
But
breaks
that's
me.
all you can say to
Yeah,
her
I'm
because
sorry.
How old is she?
nobody knows.
5, almost 6.
I mean, could you check your blood sugar and do stuff with her? Be like, I'm gonna be your teammate with diabetes. I mean, that sucks for you, but maybe it'll.
I mean, think about the babies that get cancer. Why do they
That's
get
all you can
cancer?
do. And let them be
So
mad.
I would say God likes you so much, you're so gifted, that's what I kind of.
Right.
Or knew you could handle it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Knew
that's
you could handle it.
that's
That's what
my
that's what I
mom.
try to say, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
And I've told her that many times, actually. You're probably
And-
going to have to for
You could also
forever.
point her to
And you know what? It's
lots
gonna
of
make her
athletes
stronger.
and people who've actually done more than they were capable of because they had diabetes.
You could also talk to your pediatrician or your endocrinologist and have a referral for a therapist for a 5-year-old. That's fine. That's totally somebody that has a professional
Yeah.
training to be able to.
Yeah, but if you
Instead of
break
all of
down
our
in front of her,
antidotes.
that's not a good thing.
I know,
I know what you're
it's-
saying. Yeah.
But none of us know
That's not
why
true.
Right, right.
anybody gets anything, right? Do any of us know?
Right, right. True.
It's just kind of the life. That's
Does
how
she know
life
many
is.
other kids with type 1?
Just 2, 3, but she doesn't see them very often.
No.
Getting them together with her, together with
Yeah.
other kids
And
more
what I
often.
know, like a
can
lot
help.
of people, like especially parents, have done is they buy a really cheap meter from the pharmacy and they kind of let their kid just smash it with a hammer. Just
I
go
have
around.
some. I get them at garage sales.
Oh, you don't have to
yeah?
buy them, we have plenty.
Or just go to Tamara's
I
garage.
like the idea though.
Tamar.
Take them out of my
But I
garage.
think
I have
mean,
some.
I don't know what other
Okay.
people think,
Well,
but it
smash
sounds
them.
kind of
Do you
like
do that? No, I haven't, but I heard the tip. So when I go to when I'm at garage sales, if I see one, I'll pick one up. And
You're just
he
hoarding
said,
them?
and he said, Joe, that we've had him.
Yeah,
he,
Joe's really
He
good.
said, he goes, take it outside, put it when they're having a bad day. Don't even tell them what you're doing. He goes, just get the meter, put it outside, get in the car, and drive over it. And then go, okay, it's your turn, and then let them, smash it and go, yeah, and have it. I hate diabetes day, and empathize with them, and let them know it's okay to not like it, and it's okay for them to. He said, he's had it forever. Yeah.
I mean, the other thing I was thinking was, I'm guessing that question stems from like an I'm different. Like, why do I have diabetes? Because I'm so different. And so I think, like you were saying, having her interact with other kids with diabetes would help with that because it would make
Camp
it would
would be
normalize it.
Same age.
Or they're gonna go this summer.
Yeah, would be good.
I was isolated.
When
I
did
was
you-
isolated for 40 years.
Yeah.
So nobody could help me. I didn't have anybody to talk to, and it was miserable.
More play
Yeah, I had the same thing. Like no matter what my mom would tell me, like she was so sympathetic and she just understood it the best way she could. It just didn't matter. But then when I met people, like, and my whole network kind of just became diabetes. I didn't choose it; just became that way. Now, like I was just telling Tamara this morning, it really has become my biggest blessing in disguise. Like, it sometimes freaks me out when I hear people talk about a cure. It's like, okay, what do I do when there's a cure? Like, what? Like, this has become me, and I've embraced it, and I love the person I have become because of it, and all the opportunities it gave me. It's like, what do I do now? So
Well, if you're free July 4th week, you can go to Friends for Life in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I think something that helped me being diagnosed later and having like the childhood is like now raising a kid, I kind of think of like accepting everyone for as they are. Like even like some people have physical, differences on their like face or their body. So instead of thinking about it as that, like, kids get teased, like I've kind of tried to use how I feel about myself as a diabetic and feeling different. Well, okay, someone physically looks different, so teach your kid, you know, how to accept somebody else for that. So like, you may have diabetes, but they may have like a huge birthmark on their face that they're, you know, insecure about. Well, instead of like focusing on that, like embrace someone with a disability that you can actually see, so maybe you feel like a little bit empty. Like I would do that when I was younger.
I do that with my son.
Yeah.
Good comment.
So I want to thank you again and acknowledge that you are one of the huge bright spots of the diabetes community. And
Thank you.